G'day YouTube, Thursday 30th of June. Front page of my paper today is full of elections. See what I mean? Guess what? This is a malt liquor video. If we turn across, you can see someone is not sober. Page 3. More of Tony Windsor. Page 4. What the Fairfax media says will sway the voters. More of CountryMinded. More of Tony Windsor. On page 5, he also appears in a paid advertisement. Page 7, the Australian Electoral Commission tries to explain to people how to deal with the new Liberal National Party gerrymander supported by Labor to try and lock minor parties and independents off the Senate crossbenches. And then on page 8-9 we have all 10 of the candidates who are standing in the House of Representatives in the seat of New England. And you're just going to have to accept that because this is the third time I've shot this video, I have already previously marked the newspaper with a black Sharpie with my selection, so just, like, bear with me. Such is life. In the best regulated hermitages. Here we go. I'm going to put this character number 4, Robert Walker, online direct democracy. And because, in my view, vote green or die, the only thing that matters is global warming, I'm not going to listen to anything else he has to say except what he says on coal and renewable energy. Mr. Walker said it was hypocritical of Australia to sell fossil fuels to other nations while trying to reduce its own emissions. Quote, "I don't like the idea. We hand it over to these countries that are going to burn it, but we say it's not our fault because we are not the ones polluting with it," unquote, he said. The world only had a finite amount of resources, he said, and should be moving away from fossil fuels. Mr. Walker said Australia needed to start seriously investing in the renewable energy sector and start exporting technology to other nations. Quote, "We've got more sunlight in this country than most places in the world," unquote, he said. Quote, "We should have a solar panel generating scheme in the middle of Australia the size of Tasmania. That would supply the whole of Australia for free once you take out the cost of building it," unquote. All right, it's lovely ideas, but he's an independent. He's got bugger all chance of implementing any of it. COLEFAX, Stan, Christian Democratic Party, he gets a number 9. Coal mines and education. Mr. COLEFAX said there had to be a balance between the agricultural and mining industries. Quote, "We must find some way of doing two things, produce coal to export and to make money for the country, but never lose the best parts of our country," quote, he said. Quote, "We have these great depositories of coal, so we might as well use them," unquote. "We might as well go and smash our grandchildren in the heads with a fucking claw hammer, because global warming will kill them." Mr. COLEFAX also said renewable energy, quote, "seems to be the logical thing to do. Quote, I've seen in Western Australia renewable energy is doing quite well. These things have got to be looked at and not just brushed off," unquote. Yep, second worst thing on the ticket. Mailer David, CountryMinded. Coal and renewable energy. Quote, "Mines are still vital to Australia, but if it poses a risk to land, water or air, we've got to take a pull on the reins," unquote. Mr. Mailer said the Shenhua, Watermark and BHP Karuna coal mines on the Liverpool Plains were, quote, "untenable." Quote, "What you're doing in that space is stealing from your children and grandchildren," unquote, he said. Quote, "It's not as if we don't have other coal resources. We've got them from the Cape all the way to Victoria. Why do we actually need to dig up coal in the most productive land in the country?" Quote, "We've got a finite amount of resources and we can't continue to do what we're doing," unquote. Peter Whelan, Liberal Democratic Party. Landowners should have the right to decide what happens on their land and below it. What an absolute straw man bullshit idea. Landowners own the top 3 inches of the topsoil. The water rights and the mineral rights belong to a different government department entirely. It's nothing to do with your title deed. Quote, we've got strong policies around the rights of landowners and we've gained a lot of support for them, unquote, Mr. Wheelan said. Quote, the wealth of Australia has been built on cheap energy, in other words, coal, unquote. The government should act as a, quote, regulatory and monitoring body, unquote, to establish mining standards and ensure there are no effects on aquifers or surrounding properties. While Australia has been built on coal, the Liberal Democrats see the country's energy future as a mixture of fossil fuels, renewable energy and nuclear power. Quote, it should be up to the market to choose the exact nature of that mix, Mr. Wheelan said. Sock account for big business. Sock account for big business. Ewings, David, Country Labor. Coal and renewable energy. Despite being an ex-coal miner, Mr. Ewing said the nation needed to transition away from coal into renewable energy, an industry he believed New England could be a, quote, big player, unquote, in. New England has such an abundance of natural resources, I don't think there's a ceiling on what we can do. We've got space, land and sunshine, unquote, he said. Quote, I'd love to see more investment in New England green energy. The more of those sorts of things we can get for New England, the more jobs we can create, the more efficient we are, and the more we can transition the economy, unquote. He said he was against any mine that could impact on prime agricultural land. Country Labor is sort of like the rural regional version of the Australian Labor Party. Tabor, Robert, Independent. Coal and renewable energy. With his extensive background in renewable energy, it may surprise people to hear Mr. Tabor say Australia still needs coal mines. Absolutely surprised me, shocked me to the core. I thought he knew better than that. I've got no problem with mining. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for mining, he said. The renewable energy industry is there to provide an alternative form of energy, but it's not going to be the only energy. In my lifetime, I will never see renewable energy as a sole source of power. So we have to rely on other sources of power to carry on. We'd be crazy to believe otherwise. Rod Taylor. Do you stumble that in the supermarkets in Glen Innes and Armidale, there are 9 meals for everybody who lives in town? 3 days worth of food. Everything comes into town, just-in-time delivery on 3 days. And everything on every shelf in every supermarket arrives on a truck, and the trucks run on diesel. And Australia has no refineries. All our transport fuel comes from Singapore via boats. Refined transport fuel. We have 29 days worth of possible storage. On average, we have 21 days. Sometimes there's only 14 days worth of fuel in Australia. And there's only 3 days worth of food in the supermarkets. Sorry, dude. Unless you're going to die in the next 5 years, I think you will see a day when renewable energy is the only energy in Australia. Windsor, Tony. He gets my number 2 vote because after preferences, it means he'll effectively get my vote. Coal and renewable energy. While the Shenhua, Watermark and BHP Karuna mega mines on the Liverpool Plains are not in the seat of New England, Mr. Windsor said their economic and environmental impacts would rip through the region. Mr. Windsor was instrumental in pushing for the water trigger legislation. What that means is as soon as the coal mine makes a mess of the underground water aquifer, the coal mine has to be stopped by federal legislation. It's one of the reasons the National Party, the Liberal Party and the Labor Party all hate his guts. He stood in the way of their Chinese paymasters. Until we know the potential impact on the water resources, we shouldn't go there at all. It's got to be based on science, not political science, and not who's got the biggest wallet. He also said renewable energy was an extraordinary opportunity that would create another layer of jobs. The handbrake on it has been politics, he said. So you see, he won't get my number 1 vote. He won't get paid $2.60 for me voting for him. But when the person I vote for does get my number 1 vote and doesn't get elected on primaries, Tony Windsor will get my second preference. Which will make it that much easier for Tony Windsor to make sure that Barnaby Joyce is unemployed on Sunday morning. Barnaby's view on coal and renewable energy. Mr. Joyce is a, bracket, allegedly, close bracket, outspoken critic of the Shenhua, Watermark and BHP Karuna coal mines on the Liverpool Plains for tactical political purposes. But he said it was not in his power to cancel mining licences. Mr. Joyce said the mining legislation was overwhelmingly a state's responsibility. People get frustrated with that, but it's the truth, he said. With the $400 million secured for the Glen Innes wind farm, Mr Joyce said New England would be the only seat in Australia to be a renewable energy exporter, bracket, despite his best mate, Tony Abbott's, most fervent efforts. It's the biggest capital investment that's ever happened in Glen Innes. It's going to have 200 workers during construction and another 15 employed full-time when it's finished. And you know what, Barnaby? The very first one of my Vote Green or Die stickers that I sold in Glen Innes was to the wind farm public relations office in the main street. Mercurious GOLDSTEIN for the Greens. He's going to get my #1 vote to boost the Greens' electoral standing. Coal and renewable energy. That's because the Greens are the only party which is standing against digging and burning and exporting fossil fuels. The Greens plan to stop all new coal mines, not just in New England, but nationwide. Quote, every New Englander, whether they're a farmer or they live in town, needs sustainable agriculture for the food we eat. Every New Englander drinks water. So we need to keep the mines and CSG wells away from this area, Mr GOLDSTEIN said. Australia already has enough thermal coal mines operating to keep the Port Kembla and Whyalla steelworks running. Mr GOLDSTEIN wants the New Englander to shift away from mining. He said the region had the potential to become not just 100% renewable, but 200% renewable. The reason I say that is, at full capacity, the solar farm at Moree and the wind farms at Glen Innes and Inverell can power 175,000 homes. That is more than double the number of homes in New England, quote, he said. That means New England will be an exporter of renewable clean power to Australia. Vote green or die. Global warming coals. Global warming coals. Vote green or die. You know, like nothing else matters. And then there's Phillip Cox, #3. Coal and renewable energy. Coal mining and coal seam gas might last for 30 years, but the legacy of the destruction will last hundreds of years. He said, Mr Cox is deeply concerned about the resource industry's impact on the region's environment and water resources, and he's had first-hand experience fighting the industry. Quote, in 2009 and 2010, I was engaged as a consultant with Forest New South Wales, and I took on the coal companies and the coal lobby group, he said. I took on Eastern Star Gas and everybody operating on Forest New South Wales lands without formal land access agreement, without proper remediation and environmental safeguards, and so progressively put those in place to protect the environment. All the major parties, both at a state and federal level, have a conflict with coal. They are so keen on royalties that they are prepared to sacrifice anything. This Independent is a solicitor who lives in Armidale, previously from Moree. If he was the Greens candidate, I would be voting for him. Presumably he has a problem with the Greens party. Windsor gets my second preference because I want him to beat the pants off Barnaby Joyce. Everything else is kind of like garnishing. But there you are. That's it. That is the official advice on how to vote the Warbles on a Lot ticket in 2 days, when we here in Oz get to decide who the fuck is running our country. And anybody who doesn't vote, or who deliberately cast an informal vote because they think that whatever way they vote, a politician's going to get in, so therefore they want to draw cartoons or write rude words on the ballot paper. I did that when I was 18, when I was young and silly. And then a year or so later, I realised that I had wasted my opportunity to vote against a bunch of dickheads that I really disagreed with. So what I want you to do is go out there and vote against the people who are wrong, in your opinion. Otherwise, you're going to be like the young people in Britain. 70% of them failed to vote in the Brexit Remain referendum. 70% of those who did vote voted to remain. And now all the young people in Britain, that's under 35, are breaking their knees while kicking themselves in the arse at every step they take. because they couldn't be bothered. So, try to be better than a silly young pommy. Vote green or die. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao. Yeah.